Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. Now it's just been announced that Ricky Jones, the suspended Labour Councillor who was on trial for encouraging violent disorder, has been found not guilty following a week-long trial. Why was he acquitted? Why did the case take so long to come to court? Why were other people jailed straight after they were arrested for similar or lesser offences following the Southport riots? And is this an example of two-tier justice? I'll look to try and answer those questions in this video. Now, the purpose of this video is not to say whether or not the jury's verdict was correct or not. I didn't sit through the evidence, I don't know all the facts, so I'm not in a position to make that judgment. The purpose of this video is to try and provide some context as to what was needed to be proven by the prosecution and to answer some of the inevitable comparisons that will be made following the finding of not guilty. Welcome to my channel, Andy on Crime, where I talk about high-profile criminal cases and other aspects of criminal law in England and Wales. And as I say in other videos, if you want to follow me on other social media platforms, I am on TikTok. My handle is AndyOnCrime1, and I'm also on Twitter or X, and my handle is AndyOnCrime. If you do want to support my channel, then you can click the join button down below and become a member and get some exclusive perks, or you can click the link up here or in the description and sign up with NordVPN, where you can get a huge discount on a range of their plans, and you will be supporting my channel. So thank you. With all that being said, let's get into the video. So I'm going to start off with the facts of this case. And if you're watching this video, you probably are familiar with them, but I'm just going to briefly recap. So Ricky Jones is a 58-year-old, he was 57 at the time of the speech, Labour Councillor who was subsequently suspended and was a full-time official at the Transport Salaried Staffs Association, representing Dartford in Kent. Now, on the 7th of August 2024, now this is following the riots that took place in Southport following the stabbings at the end of July, he attended an anti-racism counter-protest in Walthamstow in East London, and he addressed the crowd, reacting to what they termed was a far-right protest following the Southport murders. He described during the speech the far-right protesters as disgusting Nazi fascists and declared that we need to cut all of their throats, and he made a throat-slitting gesture. The speech was amplified by a microphone and videos of it went viral online. Jones was arrested the following day on the 8th of August 2024, and he was subsequently charged with the offence of encouraging violent disorder, and he was suspended from the Labour Party, as I've said, and the case was brought before Snaresbrook Crown Court. Now, during the trial, the prosecution argued that Jones's language was inflammatory, rabble-rousing language in a tense atmosphere and believing that his words could incite violence. Jones's defence was that the remarks were not directed at protest participants, but were instead directed towards individuals who had placed National Front stickers with hidden razor blades on public trains. The jury returned its verdict today after 30 minutes of deliberation and decided that Jones was not guilty. So those are the brief facts of the case. In terms of the law, I stated that Ricky Jones was charged with the offence of encouraging violent disorder, but what does that actually look like? So intentionally encouraging or assisting the commission of another offence is a criminal offence in its own right. And the Crown Prosecution Service charged Jones with encouraging violent disorder, which is contrary to Section 44 of the Serious Crime Act 2007, and hopefully you can see that appearing on screen now. That then points to the underlying offence, which in this case is violent disorder, which is contrary to Section 2 of the Public Order Act 1986, and again hopefully you can see that on the screen. So to find Jones guilty of that offence, the prosecution had to prove firstly that the act was capable of encouraging the offence. So Jones did an act, and this can include speaking, writing, gestures, posting online and a variety of other matters, and that act was capable of encouraging the commission of the underlying offence. So here the offence of violent disorder, and that's where 3 or more persons use or threaten unlawful violence. Now, it's not necessary for the offence of encouraging that the underlying offence was actually committed. So that's the first part, the act itself. The second part deals with intent. So you need to intend to encourage or assist the offence. It's not enough for the comments to be merely negligent or reckless. The intent must be present. But it's not a defence for the individual to say, I didn't think that they'd actually do it, if the individual's intent is established. And the third element that must be proven is the knowledge or belief about the circumstances of the offence. The defendant must believe that all of the elements of the underlying offence, in this case violent disorder, would be present if it occurred. And again, as I mentioned, for violent disorder, this means knowing or believing that 3 or more persons would be involved, there would be unlawful violence, and that violence would cause a person of reasonable firmness present at the scene to fear for their safety. So in terms of the specifics about this case and each element, the prosecution view about the act, this will be the words spoken and the gesture made by Ricky Jones, that the cut their throats remarks and the throat-slitting gesture could be seen as encouraging violence against far-right protesters. The defence view, so the view of Ricky Jones, was that the words were merely metaphorical and aimed not at people present, but at anonymous individuals responsible for the razor blade vandalism that I talked about with the National Front stickers and the razor blades, and that it was political hyperbole and not a literal call to an attack. The second element, intent to encourage or assist violence, the prosecution needed to show that Jones meant to get people to commit violent disorder, not just that his words were ill-advised. And the defendant's case was that he was a lifelong advocate of peaceful activism, had no history of inciting violence, and was addressing an audience who were expected to behave peacefully. And then going back to the third element, belief in the necessary circumstances, again, the prosecution argued that given the tense environment after the riots following the Southport murders, Jones knew that violence would break out or could break out. And Jones, again, on this point, he believed that the anti-racist crowd were committed to peaceful protest and had no reason to believe that violent disorder would occur. Now, we don't know the specifics of how the jury came to their decision. They came to a conclusion after only 30 minutes of deliberating, and given that Jones's principal defence was that there was no intention for any violent disorder to be carried out, it's not a leap to suggest that the jury's focus would be on not being sure that he had the intent for other people to go out and commit acts of violent disorder. I am clearly speculating here, but I think it's an educated guess, given that that was the principal limb of his defence. And of course, a jury has to be sure that a person intended to cause or incite other people to commit acts of violent disorder, even if they think, and if you're an advocate here or have served on a jury, you may have heard defence counsel say this in their speech. If you think that they might, probably, or possibly intended, then that is not enough. The directions that would have been given to the jury by the judge is that they have to be sure of every element of the offence. If they're not sure, then the only verdict they can return is not guilty. So whilst I am speculating, that would appear to be a logical conclusion as to why they came to that decision. Whether or not that was the correct decision, it's not for me to say. I didn't hear the evidence and I was not present during all of the facts. So that's the law behind this case. I'm now going to move on to try and answer some of the questions that will inevitably arise as a result of this decision. So the first question that I've seen online was actually prior to the case going ahead, which was, why is this taking so long to come to court? Other individuals were arrested, charged, and then sentenced well within a short period of time. Why is this case taking so long? Well, the big difference between a lot of the people who were jailed as a result of the riots following the Southport murders is that they pleaded guilty. And I've done a video on 100 rioters who were jailed following the riots in 2024, and all of the individuals featured in those cases pleaded guilty. So there's no requirement for a trial, there's no requirement for directions, there's no requirement for further evidence or defence statements to be submitted in the lead up to a trial. You plead guilty and then you can be sentenced by a judge, and that's the reason why that took place. Why does it take so long for a trial to come before a court? Well, that's all as part of the backlog that has been created over the last 10 years, exacerbated to a certain extent by COVID, but there was a huge backlog, and they are still dealing with cases which take place in 1 year, and it takes 1, 2, 3 or 4 years even to come before a court. So a delay of a year between incident and conclusion of a trial, actually in the criminal justice system as it is at the moment, is relatively swift. We're having cases such as rape trials which are being listed into 2029, such as the backlog in the criminal justice system. So that's the principal reason. The second question that I want to address is an inevitable comparison with the case of Lucy Connelly, who was jailed for 31 months for the offence of inciting racial hatred following a tweet that she posted which contained references to burning down hotels with migrants in them. Why was she jailed and Ricky Jones has now been acquitted? Well, firstly, she pleaded guilty, so she accepted the prosecution case against her amounted to inciting racial hatred. And then we learned following her appeal, and again I've done a video on the appeal and why it was rejected. In her appeal, it was shown by the original defence counsel that he had thoroughly briefed her on the categorisation of this offence. He let her read the sentencing note that he was delivering to the court as part of her mitigation, and she signed to say that she agreed with it. If she had pleaded not guilty, then she would have been afforded the right of a trial, and had she run a trial, she may well be in the same position as Ricky Jones, where she could have been acquitted, but she chose to plead guilty. One of her principal concerns was that if you plead guilty at the earliest opportunity in England and Wales, then you're entitled to a 1/3 reduction off of your sentence. Now that is on a sliding scale, so if you don't plead guilty at the first opportunity, but then later plead guilty, you do get some credit, but it is reduced. So she wanted to maximise the credit that she would get for pleading guilty. So she gave evidence as part of her appeal where she said she didn't really understand the nature of what she was agreeing to, but the defence counsel that represented her originally had documented evidence that she'd signed to say she agreed, and she understood that what she was pleading guilty to was the top level offence. And then when you look at the sentencing guidelines for that type of offending, it was a sentence which was within the gift of the judge to award, and therefore when the appeal went through, the sentence was not found to be manifestly excessive, which is the test that the Court of Appeal used to determine whether a sentence is unfair. So in summary, she pleaded guilty, so there was no requirement for a trial. She was shown to have understood or been told and signed to agree with the categorisation of the offending, and the sentence was within the sentencing range for that category of offending. Had she run a trial, she could have been found not guilty, but she chose not to, and this is the consequence of which she has. So ultimately, is this a case of two-tier justice in action? Well, my view, for what it's worth, is that this is a case where an individual was accused of a criminal offence, elected to have a trial because that they did not believe that the elements of the offence were met and that they were not guilty of the offence. They appeared before a jury of their peers, argued their case, and the prosecution argued their case, and the jury determined that they could not be sure that the offence was committed. Any other person that is subject to criminal proceedings in England and Wales is afforded that same right. If they want to have a trial and go before a jury, they can do so. And that is ultimately what happened here. There's nothing unusual about it. Occasionally juries make decisions that people don't agree with, both convicting people and also acquitting people who the general public thinks should have been convicted or acquitted the other way. So I wouldn't say that this is an example of two-tier justice. I would say this is an example of an individual electing to go before 12 peers and argue their case and ultimately being found not guilty. Whether or not that's the right decision is not for me to say because I didn't hear all the evidence. That's all for this video. If you do have any comments, then please drop them down below. If you did enjoy this video, then please do give it a like. And if you'd like to see more from me, then please do subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Take care.